I looked at myself one day and asked myself, is this all that I am doing as an adult? On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is raspberry pique tea. So grab your mugs and let's review every year of my 20s. Happy Soju Friday to all my Soju shotties out there. Welcome back to another episode. This is episode 46 of season 1, and we are T-minus 4 episodes away from being at the end of the season. I know I prefaced it a little bit early last week, but we do have a whole month left of the season, so do not worry. And I'm trying to get season 2 ramped up and started as soon as possible after season 1, so there won't be too much of a gap, but we'll see how long that takes me. But welcome to another episode. Today, I made a concoction. It's been a while since I've made something, or at least like thrown together different ingredients to make a drink. We had fresh raspberries, so I smushed them together and threw in some electrolyte powder, added some water and ice. So cheers. I'm a really big fan of raspberry. I don't know if anyone else is a berry girl, but growing up, blueberries was my favorite fruit ever. Like, nothing topped blueberries until I turned 23, and then mangoes became my favorite fruit. But for my whole childhood, I was a berry girl, and I loved everything from blueberries to raspberries to strawberries. And surprisingly, strawberries has been lower on my tier. I know everyone loves strawberries, but I grew up not liking strawberries as much as I did other types of berries. But strawberries are definitely on my list of favorites now. Super, super random, but I'm so curious what other people's favorite fruits are. So if you have any spare time to leave a comment, please let us know what your favorite fruit is, because I'm a big fan of fruits and I'm so curious what everyone else likes. You know, the one fruit I don't particularly like, oh, I hate to say this, but it's kiwi. I feel like the hit ratio for kiwi tasting good is so low for me. So I never take the risk. I don't go into the grocery store and think, I want kiwis today. But once in a while, if I have a really sweet kiwi that's not sour, that does change my mind a little. But most of the time, I feel like kiwis are just super, super sour. Anyways, welcome back to today's episode. Today I'm going full blast on myself. I'm just gonna start rambling about every single year of my 20s. The topic of today is actually reviewing different eras of my life, and specifically reviewing every year in my 20s. I know that's a big task, and that's a lot of years because I'm kind of old. We're gonna be going through my life year by year, and on top of just exposing myself like I do every single episode, I feel like today we're going to expose myself even more and also go through all the trials and tribulations that I navigated in my 20s. But yeah, let's get into it. For some context, I am currently 27, turning 28 in June, but I don't think I'll be around on the podcast in June because we'll be in our off-season break. So unfortunately, I won't be able to pass my 28th birthday with you guys. Maybe we'll do a little makeup birthday once I get back. But last year, if you guys remember when I started the podcast, I think episode 2 was when my birthday had just passed. And so I made a whole episode about getting older, and I cannot believe a whole year has gone by and I'm turning 28 this year. I am officially in my late 20s now, so things feel different. Things feel a little bit more worn and weathered down. Let's take it all the way back to 2017. This was when I had turned 20 years old. I was thinking of reviewing even earlier years in my life, but I feel like the 20s is such a core pivotal period that I wanted to just go through the 20s by itself. So I'm going to start at age 20, but there is a life that I led before age 20 that I guess I won't share on today's episode. So when I was 20, I was still in college, and this was my junior year of college that I just started, and I turned 20 in the summer because I'm a June baby. So I've always had a summer birthday and we're always on break. So I had a couple months of summer break where I was working and interning that summer. This was before I met James, or before James and I started dating. We knew each other for 2 years at that point, but we hadn't started dating and everything. And I think my 20s, specifically age 20, was really defined by validation from other people. And I spoke about this on one of my episodes where I talked about love and romance and finding a lifelong partner. But I sought validation in every single person that was in my life, whether it was a friend, whether it was people I worked with at work, or if it was romantic partners. And I had mentioned in that other episode called Don't Let Your boyfriend stop you from finding your husband, that I had also entangled myself into many, many situationships. The reason I saw a lot of validation in other people is because I was a little insecure. I would say throughout my life, something that's remained consistent is I have opposing thoughts and opposing opinions on myself, self-perception, perception of other people, just perception of the world that is kind of contradictory. So I'm a Gemini, and maybe that explains it a little bit, but I've always had very dichotomous thoughts. Is dichotomous a word? I know dichotomy is, but I don't know if dichotomous is the right adjective. But I've always had opposing thoughts on things. When I was in college, I feel like it was an interesting combination of me being super, super confident, because that was the first time I was growing into being a woman and receiving validation from people. But also I was very insecure because I was a people pleaser, and because I always sought validation from other people, I never felt fully assured in myself and who I was and the things that I was doing with my life. And so right before James and I had gone together, that was an interesting period when I first turned 20 that I was always constantly seeking validation from other people. This would look like me wanting to make sure that people liked me and that friends thought highly of me. And if I had found out that someone didn't think highly of me, that would just crush me. Now that I'm older, I kind of understand you're not going to ever have 100% hit rate with friends. You know, like there will always be a friend out there that has a perception of you that you don't necessarily carry for yourself. And when I was younger, it was harder for me to understand and grapple with, I spend so much time with this person. I've entrusted them with so much information about myself, and they've entrusted me with information. How could they not like me? Like that was one of the bigger reasons of why I would overthink my relationships with people and my perception and my image. And I think the same would go for romantic partners too. If I was in a situationship with someone, whether it's like a hookup situation or a flirty situation, and they didn't want to get into a full relationship, but I did, I would always question it. And it didn't help that I was boy crazy in my college years. I don't like to admit that, but I definitely had my era of always wanting male validation. I think this is common for some girls, and especially girls, I think growing up who didn't have male validation. Once you get it for the first time in college or maybe later into life, you crave it. And I think by boy crazy, I mean that I would constantly be talking about boys. I would be talking about guys that I thought was cute, guys that I was talking to and messaging, guys that I had just met. And it definitely was like an enablement cycle because me and other girlfriends would just talk about guys. And I wouldn't say there's anything bad about that, but when I look back at some of the journals that I wrote during this time, they were always journals about boys. And I wish I had written more about, the things that I was doing with my time, how my extracurriculars were going, like random things like that I don't really have a window into anymore because I don't see that show up in my journal. Like I definitely lived in the moment when I was in college. I enjoyed every single second that I was a college student. I still to this day think it's like the funnest time in my life that I had, but I never wrote about anything besides friendships and boys. I rarely honestly wrote about how I felt about myself, like my personal perception of myself. And sometimes it would be about more of my emotional side, so maybe feelings of depression and sadness and stress. But I wish I documented more, And I think a defining thing of this period in my life is just that everything was so externally based. When I went out and did things, it was with people. If I wanted to go anywhere on a trip, it was like a group trip. I never did anything by myself, and I didn't really develop independence until I was in my mid-20s, which I think is a little bit late because a lot of people at some point have experienced doing things for themselves maybe a little bit earlier on. But even when I went to study abroad, it was because some of my friends were going on study abroad, and I don't think I would have gone on study abroad if not for other people that I knew going as well. Age 20 was also the first year that mental health issues hit me like a truck. I will say growing up, I've been grateful and thankful enough to be mostly, not entirely, but mostly free of too much mental health struggles. I did feel feelings of sadness and frustration and resentment and guilt growing up for various reasons, but it never compounded into affecting like me and my studies and different things like that. I wouldn't say I was depressed for prolonged periods of time, but I had waves of depression, and this was maybe the first time that I felt pressure, like heavy mental pressure. And I explicitly remember age 20 was the first time that I had stayed up all night because I was depressed and crying and stressed and felt like the world was tumbling down. And it's hard to describe exactly what depression feels like for different people, but this was like the first time that I was experiencing true depression. And I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do with myself. And I remember it was 3 a.m. and it was exam week. And I think I was also stressed about my exams, and I was experiencing problems with my friends. And going back to the validation thing, anytime I had friendship falling outs or problems or issues, it killed me. And I think the compounding of friendship problems, exams, and then also friendship breakups because of romantic complications, which I won't get into, I was feeling extremely depressed. Like I felt like I didn't know how to move forward because things felt at an all-time low. And this was the first time that I didn't know who to turn to. I remember I was walking around in the courtyard of our dormitory. I wanted to talk to someone, but I didn't know who to talk to. And I would never do this because I shield my parents from my emotions most of the time. Like I try not to burden my parents with whatever's going on in my life. But this was the first time that I picked up the phone at 3 a.m. and called my mom because I was just delirious. I was crying. I really can't remember what caused me to feel so sad in that moment. But I remember my mom consoling me on the phone. And I remember asking myself, what is this that I'm feeling? Like, this is so weird. This is like a foreign experience for me. So 20 was also a defining emotional era for me. It was the first year that I felt mental struggle in a more pronounced way than I had before. But it's not to say it wasn't a good year. I think I had good moments in that year as well. It was just more of a transitionary period where I felt like more adult things were hitting me, which they honestly weren't, because once you get into adult life, you actually start seeing what is scary and actually intense. But moving on with age 20, I think I was very sheltered at age 20. And as some of you guys know, I started dating James that fall. So shortly after turning 20, it was maybe like a couple of months into it, we officially started dating. And that took up a good chunk of my time. I think I was pretty invested in that relationship. Obviously, right now, I'm way more invested into that relationship, but I never thought that that relationship would last longer than a couple of months, especially because I started my study abroad program. Because like I mentioned, I went on study abroad because some of my friends were going on study abroad. But I started my study abroad program like 2 months after we started dating. Then we were doing long distance, and long distance was tumultuous. Long distance was not very fun for me because long distance was basically me staying back every single night during study abroad while my friends were going out and doing fun things in Edinburgh, the city that we were studying in. And I would stay back just to take video calls with James, and we were having classic troubles that you have early on into long distance relationships. And then we also were avoidant and anxious, and at that time it was James who was anxious and I was avoidant. It was a really interesting combination, but I do remember somehow we just made it through that hurdle. And at the very end of age 20, we were back, and I had hopped into my first internship. If there's anything that I wish I told myself at that age, it's to stop looking to other people for comfort and validation. I think it's really great to have friends and people around you and to build community, but I did it to an extent where I felt like I needed people around me. There's decisions that I made, including study abroad, which I wish I wasn't so heavily influenced by other people, because study abroad actually wasn't as enjoyable for me. I think if you catch me and you try to ask me about study abroad, I'll probably say some nice things about it, like, oh, it was really great to see different countries and it was really fun. But I was so tapped into community, or the community that I had around me by default, that I would never take solo trips if we were going on a trip during study abroad, which most people do, because study abroad, you're basically in a new country and you can take very quick side quests on the weekends to different places around. And for me, we were in Scotland, so it was so easy to go anywhere else in Europe. It was probably like $10 to get to London because Ryanair is so good. I remember that whole study abroad trip. I never picked a place that I wanted to visit and went there. And all of my other friends who went to study abroad, they did solo trips. They organized trips that they wanted to take because they wanted to visit a country. And I would always just be tagging along because I was scared to do things on my own. And I think I didn't have a fully formed plan for myself. You don't need to have a fully formed plan for yourself, but you should also have an opinion, which I didn't have at that time. So if there's any lesson that I want to tell myself for Sarah at age 20, it's to stop looking to other people for validation and also direction. And also to be smart about dating, because I was not a very smart cookie in the jar back then when I was dating. I'm lucky I got James, but James and I also had some issues until we fully came together. So I think I wish I had someone like a big sister to just sit me down and tell me about dating and what to look out for. But I was always seeking validation from men, and that just created so many situations where I was not around the right people. Overall, though, I would say age 20 was a 6 out of 10. I think it was a pretty solid year. I still enjoyed a lot of my sophomore going into junior year. And the biggest thing I look to nowadays when I evaluate how good a year was is if I had any regrets. I think I didn't regret anything when I was 20. I learned a lot. I experienced life. I did things. If anything, I just wish I had more of a stronger opinion about stuff. The next year that we'll get into is age 21, and 21 was so fun. Not because of the drinking limit, because let's be honest, I think everyone starts drinking before age 21, but it was my senior year of college and I felt like a lot of things were in place for me. And senior year tends to be really fun when you do the pre-work of setting up your senior year really well, like finishing all your requirements and classes so that you can take easy chill classes during the school year, or working really hard to get a good internship that converts to full-time, just planning trips in advance. I remember my favorite trip that I ever went on, even though I was a broke college student, was a trip that I planned with the only 2 girlfriends that are available during winter break. We were very broke, so we had booked a dingy Airbnb that was like an hour away from the actual beach town. And if you're looking to go to Cancun, do not do what we did. But it was just the funnest trip because I was in such a clear state of mind. I feel like things were solid. I had my friends. I had a lot of community around me. I also felt like I knew myself a little bit better, and part of it is contributing to just growth and growing older. I also just came back from an internship where I felt like I developed a little bit more independence, and I also had my boyfriend. So it was a very positive year for me, and usually every year of school came with firsts. So I had a lot of firsts that year as well. I did my first performance with my dance troupe. So I was part of a belly dancing troupe, but I never got to perform because I was studying abroad the year before. And that was the year that I joined. So this was my first year performing, and something about being in a belly dance troupe with just girls felt so fun. Sorority culture wasn't really big in our college. And so having a group of girls that I would pregame with before going out, or we could just like text in the group chat if something happened, like a breakup or anything. That just felt so good. And it was just built-in community, you know? I really miss having built-in community and the things that you do, because back in college, you kind of just take it for granted. You're like, oh, of course these people will always be around in my life. Of course, I'll always have friends in the same city as I'm in. But it is not like that. Like once you leave college, there's not really built-in community around the things that you do. And if there is, you have to try very hard to keep it intact. It just doesn't come for free. So that's one of the things that I remember and I cherish a lot from senior year, if you have any opportunity and you're in school to do something active in a troop or group, I highly, highly recommend it because you just meet like-minded people too, whether it's a dance troupe or it's a council, like design council, or just anything where you can meet like-minded people. You get automatic friends from doing things like that. Okay, this is a funny one. This was my first time getting a perm, but unfortunately back then everything was super, super dingy for me. So I bleached my hair in the girls' bathroom at like 7 a.m. in the morning, and I bleached it multiple times because I wanted to get it super, super light. But once I went back to black, I decided to get a perm right before senior year because I was like, oh, I haven't done a perm before. But little did I know that you should not put chemicals on top of chemically treated hair. So my hair started just like melting off of my head. And that's all to say, I ruined my hair right before senior year. And I was very upset about it because the beginning of senior year, I was basically wearing hats all the time. My hair was really short, but by the end of it, I kind of forgot that had happened. And I still had a really enjoyable senior year. But if you ever see photos of me from age 21 to 22, my hair will look extremely frazzled and extremely, extremely dry. And there is a reason why that happened. But I like to think of everything as a life lesson. So now I know that you should never perm a bleached head of hair, even though that is probably very intuitive. Other than that, I think 21 was a great year for me. I'm trying to remember what I did. I can probably talk at length about how my college experience was because I have had a pretty good experience in college. I know sometimes I talk to James and he doesn't think of college as fondly as I do, but I just had a great time. And I think senior year was the best year for me because I felt so confident and secure in everything. And when your life is planned out for you, or you feel like it's planned out for you, it's very fun to enjoy. You know, this might be kind of sad to say, but I realize I'm the best version of myself when I don't have things to worry about, as with maybe everyone. But at that time, at 21, I felt like everything was planned out for me. I had a relationship and I thought we were going to have a wonderful relationship after college, which we did, but it was tumultuous. I had a stable job. I thought it was my dream job and the job that I would be in forever. I was taking fun classes. Like I took a class on puppetry and all we did was make puppets and act out scenes. Of course, I was taking like algorithms and other complicated things for my degree as well. But I think I had a lot more fun and things felt very clear for me. So I would overall rate 21 as a 9 out of 10. I was happy. I was thriving. I was living my life. If there's any lesson that I would give myself, it's honestly to myself right now to be optimistic and retain that sense of joy and clarity for life that I had back then. Okay, now we are moving on to age 22. I think 22 has to be one of my lowest years. Without giving any context into 22 and without even reflecting on any of it, I want to say it was a 2 or a 3 out of 10 for me. 22 was so rough and for many, many reasons, but this was the first year that I was an adult, like a true adult, out of school, out of your parents' home, out of just any sheltered space that I was in before. And I remember it was a very not glamorous year. So right out of college, I moved to New York City and I lived in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, right next to Times Square. So a lot of tourists flow through Times Square. It was a very busy area. And I remember my budget was also pretty low because I didn't have that much saved up. I had some money for my internship, but I definitely didn't have the money that people have now to spend on rent. Like tech people spend a lot of money on rent, which I've tried to refrain from doing. But my first year out of college, I remember I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with a roommate. I was in the flex bedroom. So you basically put up a wall, like a temporary wall that they install. And I got the living room. So I got the living room cut in half and I lived on the window side of the living room. I didn't know anything about interior decorating back then, so all I had was like a rack, a mattress, a bed frame, and a desk. And it was just a very low maintenance setup. But 22 was really defined by convenience and defaults. Like I fell onto my defaults for a lot of social things and defaults being defaulted friends. I don't think I was very good at making friends. I think I knew how to make friends, but I never went out of my way to make friends. And going back to that thing that I was saying about me being not so opinionated, I think I just hung out with whoever was convenient to hang out with. I hung out with people in my comfort zone, meaning people from school that I had already known or people from work that I met during orientation. And as much as these people were cool people and I hung out with them and they were my friends, I also feel like I just defaulted to whoever was around. I never actively picked up the habit of making friends until the second time that I went back to New York City. And this was a couple years later. But this first year out of college felt so blurry. I don't remember a lot because nothing really excited me. And my routine for the first time in my life was to get up in the morning at 8:30, get ready for work, and spend the majority of my day sitting at a desk working. This is also the first time that I experienced back pain. So I recall in the first month, I told my manager, because we had one-on-one syncs every single week, I told her that I was experiencing shoulder pain and I didn't know where it was coming from. And she referred me to an ergonomic specialist, and I went to the ergonomic specialist. She spent half an hour telling me how to set up your desk and your monitor and what height. I think that was helpful, but I also don't think that shoulder discomfort ever went away. It just kind of kept coming in and out of my life. But work life was so confusing to me because I would sit at a desk for 9 hours in a day. And if I wanted to overachieve, I'd sit there for like more. And I do more work after work, but I would just sit and do work all day. After the sheen of starting a new job started wearing off, I looked at myself one day and asked myself, is this all that I am doing as an adult? Granted, I didn't have any hobbies that I was investing my time into. I hung out with friends, but these were friends of convenience rather than friends that I had made in a new city. And I was staying back at home every single night, calling my boyfriend because we were in long distance. And I just felt stuck. Like I felt like adult life was not what I thought it would be. There was so much happiness and joy and clarity that I had when I was in senior year of college, and suddenly getting into this position where all I'm doing all day is sitting in front of a desk and typing things and reading things. It felt like I didn't have a soul in a way. And there were moments, like we would go for happy hours and I would meet new people at work, but I just felt like the routine was rough. It was hard to adjust to the routine. And I don't recall anyone that I knew, maybe because I didn't know people who are not in college, but I don't remember anyone warning me that my life would just be sitting in front of a desk all day. So I think my first year out of college was rough because of that. And there were moments where I would have that joy in a way. Like I remember clubbing in New York for the first time. That was fun. I drank too much. I think we got kicked out, but there were those pockets. But most of it was just sitting and doing the work. And also, maybe this is why I think of this year so as even more difficult for me, is I remember I was very excited when I first started my job, and I wanted to show my parents who, obviously they're so happy for me for starting my first job. I'm their only kid. And so seeing me go into my dream company and work full-time now was such an exciting thing for them. And I remember my parents made a trip up to New York to visit me. This was before I had a bed frame. Everything was super, super lowbrow. And they stayed with me in the apartment because I was wanting to host them for a couple days. This was also the second week of my work. So I had just started work the week prior, and I was very, very happy to see them. I remember the evening after I had taken them around the city, my mom started to fall sick, and she's always had a bad digestive system, and this time was really terrible. So we ended up having to go to the ER. And I don't know, going back to the theme of experiencing adult things for the first time, this was the first time that I saw a parent shaking and hyperventilating, and I was crying and my mom was crying, and it was like a really traumatic experience for me. And I won't share too much about it, but we were in the ER pretty much all night, and the next day she was not any better. And so it was just in and out of the hospital for her for the next couple of months. And so it was a really traumatic experience for me, and it definitely took me out of the moment in terms of living my adult life, because there were insurance bills, there were claims, there were out of state stuff because she was visiting me in New York. And I remember every day was just like a cry fest for me. I remember asking God or whatever higher being to sacrifice a bit of my health so that my mom's health could be better. And it was really tough. I couldn't bring myself to enjoy anything in life. And I remember there would be company outings where I'd just be on the corner calling my mom or calling the hospital, trying to get medical records and things like that, where I never truly got to experience that first year of working corporate and the first year of being in the city. Family is always and has always been the most important thing to me. And so my mom getting better was really the highlight of the years after. But my first year of adulthood kind of just was a blur. I also try not to remember too much of it because I don't think there were that many fond moments for me to linger on, but that was 22. I also remember later into 22, I tried to start my YouTube channel, and that was very tough for me. I would sit down and film a bit and kind of talk to the camera and then look at the footage and think, this is so cringy, this is so awkward, I could never post this. And it was a cycle. I think I tried my hand at it a couple of times and never ended up posting anything. I was scared, I was scared of people seeing me online. Back then in 2019, social media was not what it is today. People were posting, but I think it was more of a rare thing to be a content creator than it is now. And I was really scared of judgment. And so I never ended up posting anything until the pandemic happened. I turned 23 in the pandemic, and so I was back at home with my family, and work-life balance didn't really exist for me. So when I was back at home, all I did was film videos, edit videos, and eventually I got the nerve to start my YouTube channel. Took a couple of months of mental preparation and actually learning how to edit, but it was just a really work heavy year. I think there was no opportunity to really make the most of your life at that time because we were all stuck at home and didn't know what to do with it. I remember there were videos where people would be like, here's 200 things that you can do in the pandemic. And what a weird way to like talk about that time, because it was just a terrible health crisis across the world. And yet some of us lived a reality where all we were doing was scrolling social media. But I'm really grateful for that year because I got to spend a lot of time with my family. And as an only child, I think I have a lot of obligation to my parents to spend time with them, because if not me, then who else is going to visit them? But I think that was built into my routine, like eating lunches and dinners with family, having free time to sit down and learn a new skill. And for me, that was editing. And I just threw myself into work. It took a little bit of time after my mom had health issues for me to plug back into work, but I also had like a really dire mindset around work at that time. Because at 23, I was still really junior in my career, and everyone else on my team was in their 30s or 40s. And so they were a lot older, and they also had been at the company for a long time. And so I felt like I needed to prove myself. And to do that, I basically worked myself day and night, past 7 p.m., sometimes until 10 p.m. And it worked out in my favor because I did end up getting promoted early. And that's one thing that I hold on to that I'm very proud of. But I remember the feeling of being an imposter always. Like, we would be in meetings and I'd be repeating in the back of my head what my accomplishments were that week so that I could say it and not sound stupid. Once we converted to virtual meetings because of the pandemic, I would write all the things I wanted to say during meetings onto a sticky note, and I would spend 10 minutes before the meeting just preparing, even if I had just 2 sentences to say. And I was also living in constant fear that my manager thought I was not doing anything, which is so funny because I think most managers are so busy that they don't even think about you. But I always felt like an imposter, and imposter syndrome was so real for me at that time. I think my most hardworking years were also around this time. So when I was 23 and 24, I had a lot of space and mental space, mostly to throw myself into new things. And so on top of working really hard at work, I also worked really hard on my YouTube channel. And back then, I developed a lot of confidence through my YouTube channel. The one thing about throwing yourself online for people to judge and see is you get thicker skin, and you also learn to grow more into yourself and be more secure about who you are and who you're showing up as. And that's one thing that I learned a lot through my YouTube channel. this era of my life was just basically home life, YouTube, and my cat Gata, which I forgot to mention, but I got a cat with my roommate right before the pandemic, and she's a cute little black cat. She was 8 or 9 years old at the time when we got her, and it was because there was an email sent out on this listserv at work where someone was giving up their cat because their partner was moving in and their cat wasn't hypoallergenic and various reasons that she needed to give up the cat. She also had an older cat that was sick, and so that partly contributed to it. But I adopted this cat named Gata. She's a black cat. She's thriving now with my parents. I brought her to New York and we were in a 1-bedroom apartment, my flex bedroom. And because the pandemic happened, we had to decide who kept Gata. And I brought her to Maryland with me. And I basically sprung her onto my parents. And my parents are now cat people because of me. But she was a huge, huge part of my early 20s. And I'm always thankful for her because she was my first actual pet, like non-goldfish type pet. And she taught me so much about animals, about caring for a being besides yourself, about compassion. I think I'm just like saying things at this point, but I really think pets teach you so many things about life. Gata will always be my favorite cat. I'm so sorry, Moose, but she's thriving with my parents. And if James were not allergic, I would bring her to New York with me. But yeah, this was 23 for me. And I totally forgot, but I also did something crazy when I was 23, which was I funneled all my summer internship savings and my earnings from the first year of working into buying a little townhome in the suburbs. And that sounds ridiculous, but back then the mortgage rates were down, and I was like, if I don't capitalize on this now, there will never be an opportunity to. So I threw all my savings into a little home, a quaint little home that I actually really love in the suburbs. And that was my first big girl investment. If you know me in real life, I'm not a huge spender, but I do love to spend on investments. This is also a year that I forgot I had gotten a job opportunity to leave my company and work at a startup. The startup's actually thriving right now. They're doing so great. And I've always loved them. I remember telling them when I was first talking to them and interviewing that I don't think there's any better fit for a startup than this company for me. It was women owned. They have a very fun mission. And I might have mentioned this in other places, but I was going to be their founding engineer. But I didn't feel confident enough to do that at that time, at that age, because I had just started my career and felt like I was learning things. But I was also really scared of taking risks. Like I was really scared of taking a bet on myself or doing something non-conventional, taking an alternate path in life because I didn't know where that would take me. And maybe because of the way that I grew up and having scarcity mindset, I didn't want to let go of my job, even though I was heavily considering this other company. I ended up not taking that opportunity. I don't think I regret it now because I've spent the last few years still working at a great company and growing in ways that I can't even describe. But back then I was so risk averse. Like my risk tolerance was probably in the negatives. And if there's anything I would tell myself now is to not let scarcity mindset hold you back, because it really did back then for me. A lesson that I'm carrying over from that age over to right now is to really cherish the time you have with family. I didn't realize this back when we were in the pandemic, but that was a year and a half that I got to spend with my family every single day. And at no other point in my adult life do I think I'll have that unless I move my parents into my home. But it's something I'm really grateful for, and I'm glad that I got to experience for my second year of adulthood. So overall, I think 23 was a pretty decent year. I would give it a 9 out of 10, which is pretty good. The next year after that is 24. And 24, I think I had hit my stride. I think 24, I was happy and content with where things were going. I actually hit 100K subscribers on YouTube. I was so proud of myself because I think that was the year that I started seeing the fruits of my labor. So on top of the promotion that I had just gotten, I also was seeing a lot of growth on my community online, and I felt very proud of myself because of all the hard work. It was a very work-oriented year for me. I think I was mostly just focused on growing at work and growing on social media. And so there was a lot of just heads down focus time. I also think this year was really good because I felt like I had a sense of control over things. A lot of things that had happened the years prior, I couldn't control, including the pandemic and my mom's incident, and also just some shitty things that happened in New York when I first moved there. But this is the year that I felt very in control of things, and I was also happy with the direction that things were going in. The one thing I did have to let go of, though, is my relationship goals. And I've talked about this before, but when I was in college, I wanted to get married pretty early. Like I wanted to get married at 23, have a wedding 24, have kids 25, something along those lines. It's very ambitious listening to that now, and me saying it just is crazy that that was my reality back then. But at 24, I also learned the art of letting go. I vaguely think that this is the year that James and I had our big breakup, but I let go of my personal goals of having a family and getting married very soon. I started to really accept how life was going. I think I have this really strong habit of wanting to have control over everything in my life at every single moment. And as one human being, that is just unrealistic. So this is the year that I learned how to let go. That was a big lesson for me because for such a long time, I thought that family and starting a family would be my biggest challenge in my 20s. And I don't think right now that that is gonna happen in my 20s. Like maybe we'll be surprised. But yeah, that was an interesting transition point. I think 24 was maybe a 9 out of 10 for me. The next year that followed was probably the most pivotal year for me, and this was 25. I moved back to New York City because the pandemic was starting to transition into the next era. I don't know if it fully ended at that point, but everyone was moving back. The city was more lively. There was just more life to exist outside of your home. And 25 is notorious for being quarter life crisis, of course. It actually exists. I didn't think, before I was 25, I didn't think 25 would be any different than any other year. But 25 is really when you have such an existential crisis, and it's hard to describe why or how. But my therapist said that everyone goes through the same transitionary period with your job, your relationships, your friendships, and everyone starts thinking around that time, and it might have to do with the way your brain develops. But I definitely had my quarter life crisis. My 25th birthday was quarter life crisis themed. It was a dress in all black theme to mourn your early 20s. So that was a pretty fun time. I also think at 25, I had this nagging pressure to make the most out of my 20s because we had lost 2 years in the pandemic. And so functionally, I felt 23. Like emotionally, I felt like I was 23 and I had to relearn things like how to socialize and form my own opinions and like do things for myself. But it was a really independent year, and that was the first year that I grew into myself in having independence and having opinions, in feeling like the most, I wouldn't say most optimal, but feeling like a better version of myself, like a more evolved version of myself. I spent a lot of my year focused on finding myself socially. So a big priority for me moving to New York was making friends, and that was like one of the top priorities. There were many things on that list, whether it was growing in my career, getting promoted, furthering my relationship, but top priority was making friends. And this stemmed from not having a strong social network around myself when I was 22, 23, because all the friends of convenience that I had that first year out of college kind of just slipped out of my life. And during the pandemic, I think that's when I realized that none of these friends were true friends. Like some of them were good people, and I do sometimes see them and hang out with them, but they were all mostly friends by default. And so this was the year that I really wanted to establish my friend groups and my friend basis and who was my friend and who was a good, genuine friend to me. I remember, because I was trying to be so social, I would be having coffee chats and lunches, and anytime I met someone new, if they seemed remotely cool or like we vibed, I would initiate a coffee chat or a brunch. And so all my weekends during that first year back into New York City, I had filled up with friend dates. There were some weekends that I would have 3 or 4 things in a row. So I'd wake up in the mornings, I'd hop to a coffee, and then I'd hop to a lunch, and then I'd hop to like some art session, and then I'd get dinner with someone else. And it was a nonstop cycle of me meeting new people and then trying to form a friendship, and then repeating the whole process the next weekend. And definitely this was a toxic friendship era in my life, as in I was very toxically looking at friendships through the lens of quantity rather than quality. So anyone that I met, I would invite to my parties, and I ended up having parties and throwing parties where there'd be over 100 people. And some of these people I had just met the weekend prior. Granted, these were really fun parties and I'm glad I had them, but they were also pretty high stress because I was playing host. And so I was trying to be talking to everyone and introducing people and just always being on. I think age 25, I was in my like hustle era. So I was hustling on social media. I was posting every single week. I was spending my evenings going to dinners with people and then right after editing until 2 a.m. and then just repeating the cycle. And I'm saying this as if I didn't enjoy all of this. I really did enjoy meeting so many people and having a social life that was more meaningful to me, and also forming friendships because I wanted to form friendships and not because people fell into my life because they're my neighbor or because they work with me, but actually forming friendships because I clicked with someone. So that was really exciting for me. But I do think I overextended myself. And I recall that I'd be on the phone with my mom trying to help her with something at my own parties. So I'd be off in the corner for 30 minutes or 45 minutes because there'd be something wrong with a mortgage or we got scammed during closing and just random things that had happened in that year as well. If you can't tell, I do try to shield myself away from all the negative memories. So when I look back at things, I don't have a clear recollection of the negative things that happened, but I sometimes have a really clear recollection of the positives, which maybe is a good way to live, but maybe I'm just ignoring my problems. But I think 25 came with a lot of adult realities, including depression and stress. I think my work-life balance was very off balance. It was very out of whack. Like most of my understanding of work-life balance was formed in the pandemic. So clearly a time where my life was contained within the home. I feel like it was much, much easier to have good work-life balance in the pandemic than it was right after the pandemic. And I think it all came at the expense of myself. So when I moved to New York, it was a huge transition for me because on top of trying to make friends left and right and having multiple social outings to go to every single week and hosting parties and trying to befriend people, this was also a growth time in my social media. And so I remember once I moved to New York, I got a lot of brand inbounds and sponsorship opportunities and event invitations. And it was so glamorous on paper. It was so exciting for me because this is the first time as a creator that I had ever been kind of acknowledged. I was getting PR and all the fun things that creators get to experience. But because there were 10 different things happening at the same time, I don't think I actually fully ever enjoyed the experience because I remember I'd be excited about brand collaborations, but because I had spent the night before having 3 different social things, like getting dinner with someone I had just met and then jumping to someone's birthday party and then jumping to someone else's thing, would get home at 3 a.m. and I'd have to set an alarm for 8 a.m. the next morning, get up and film a sponsorship, hungover, and then because I'd have more things stacked after that, I'd rush to film the sponsorship and then I'd really quickly get ready for a brunch that I had with someone, and then I'd come back home and then film another video. And a lot of this is self-imposed, obviously. Like I didn't have to go to all these brunches. I didn't have to go to parties. I didn't have to take on sponsorships or post weekly, but I held myself up to a certain standard because I wanted my life to change. I wanted my life to be different than it was before because I felt like I had never had control of my life before the pandemic. I felt like I kind of just let things fall into place. I let myself hang out with people that were just around, and I let myself go places and travel because someone else wanted to do that. And so I wanted to have a lot of control. And I think on paper, it was so exciting and so new. Just so many opportunities, so many people, so many great things, but all of it came at the expense of myself. I was not sleeping. I was not exercising. I was not investing in hobbies I wanted to do because I wanted to work all the time and I wanted to see people all the time. And I was really burnt out. And that was the first year that I had ever burned out. I don't think I realized it was burnout until the next year when everything kind of like crashed a little bit for me, but I really thought that the life I was leading at age 25 was the correct life. And I've been reflecting on this recently about hustle culture and pushing yourself to do so much at once, but I don't think it was a healthy use of my time. I was always busy. I was always not in the moment because I was thinking about the next thing that I had to hop to and the next thing that I had to do. And it was an endless cycle and I didn't recognize it. At age 25, I also think my confidence was going up, but at the same time, this was also my first year experiencing being a respected creator in the creator space. And so I had a low self-esteem. Going back to me having like dual personalities, I was like growing in my confidence, but I also had really low self-esteem because I'd be meeting really big creators at events and I shoot myself in the foot sometimes. Like I look at myself and I'm sometimes like, why are you like this? But I remember I would be meeting big creators and they'd invite me to things and I didn't feel like I was worthy of being there. Or I would meet someone that is also in the creator space, but they have a huge following. And it's not all about numbers, but when you're a new creator and you're starting off and you're meeting people with a big following, it feels like you're meeting a celebrity and then you get really nervous. And so I remember there'd be creators who are like, oh, we should grab coffee. But then I was not secure in myself as a creator to actually take them up on that. And so I regret not allowing myself to live up to the person that I wanted to be at that time. I think 25 is also when I moved in with James. So this was my first time living with a partner. The first year was so amazing. Like James and I think we're both pretty pleasant people to be around. And so living together was mostly a breeze. And I know sometimes people move in with their partners and it doesn't feel like that. For us, it was pretty good until we got Moose. And if you guys are coming from my main channel, you probably know this, but we got Moose when he was a kitten and he was a very cute kitten, but he came with a lot of health issues. One of them being FIP, which is a pretty fatal disease unless you get the medication. At the time, the medication was illegal, so you also had to import it from China. And it was a very scary ordeal to tackle. And Moose, thankfully, I'm so grateful to this day that he's okay. But we had to inject Moose every single day with this medication. Insurance didn't cover it. You kind of had to get it through a Facebook group, and it was just really scary to navigate together. And this was the first adult challenge that we had to navigate together. But it was 3 months of us every single day wondering if Moose would be okay. And so much came from that. And I think if you're a pet owner or have a child and they've gone through illness and difficult times, I think you'll understand what I mean when I say nothing else mattered at that time. I couldn't focus on my work. I couldn't focus on seeing friends. Like I couldn't focus on anything for the 3 months that we were injecting him. And I felt also a lot of guilt. Like, is any of this caused by me? Like, am I a bad parent? And I think that ate me up and that tore me apart. And that really onset this whole feeling of how serious things in adulthood are. Things have been serious in the past, obviously, but this was the first time that I had absolutely no handle on how a situation would end up. I didn't know if Moose was going to survive. I didn't know what was going to happen. We were spending so much money on vet appointments, medications. The vets were also not as helpful for a lot of the places that we went. And I was very, very depressed and I didn't know how to navigate that. And I think James was also in a bad state too. And the two of us always carried this like black cloud with us. So that was a really tough time. And then after he got better, he had a slew of other issues. He had 2 more surgeries after that for unrelated issues. And I kind of blocked that out of my memory as well as like a really tough time. But that was like the latter half of 25. It might have been age 26 actually. If there's one thing that I want to say to myself at 25, it's to remember to take care of yourself. When things get heavy and life gets hard, it's so easy to throw yourself down the gutter. I remember when we were taking care of Moose, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to do any work. I didn't want to post on social media. I didn't want to pretend like I was happy and things were going well, because most of the time in my head, I was just thinking about Moose all the time. if there's one thing about me, it is that I'm really good at hiding my emotions. So you would never know that something's wrong with me. But lesson to myself and to you guys, take care of yourself. Don't ever do anything at the expense of your physical or mental health. Overall, though, I would say age 25 was an 8 out of 10 for me. I would say that I was leading or beginning to lead the life that I had always wanted at the expense of myself, obviously, because I didn't know how to have good balance and like maintain kind of my sanity at this point. Side note, at this age, I think I drank a lot because that's just like the norm and the pandemic had just ended. But now that I'm a little bit older, my lesson to myself is that drinking's actually not as cool as you think it is. When you're younger and you're drinking and you're having fun, it feels really good because drinking is kind of it takes away a little bit of the social pressure, or sometimes just allows you to be more free and open. But after a while, I started realizing that I would use drinking as a crutch. So if I ever felt uncomfortable socially or like I wasn't social enough that day, I would just start taking shots. And it's not good for your health, obviously, but it also makes it harder for you to learn to be yourself in public and to be comfortable with yourself and to accept things like, maybe I'm not the most loud, boisterous person here, and that's okay. And I can make connections with people without having to be like, oh my God, I'm so drunk. Are you drunk? I just remember I would use it as a crutch a lot. And I just would want to tell myself at 25 that it's okay to not drink. Okay. 26 is the year of realizing things. It is the year of growing pains and things catching up to me mentally and physically. Like I had mentioned, I think when you're easing into adulthood, you start realizing that things are more serious as you get older. And I think I've made some deeper lessons at age 26. One of the most important lessons that I've learned is maybe better described by this analogy that my physical therapist had told me about back pains. It's that if you don't lay a good foundation for yourself, then it slowly starts to catch up to you. And my physical therapist had told me that most people with back pains have a foundational issue. So a lot of adults who have body pains actually started forming that when they were younger. Not everyone, but some people, because either they didn't have the proper spinal alignment or they had bad posture, and these things compound over time. So if something's just a little bit off and a little bit crooked, over time it starts becoming more and more emphasized and it starts causing more and more issues. And you can copy and paste that analogy into other things like home foundations, and something like if a home foundation is off balance, then over time it's obviously going to wear down and maybe crumble, and it takes years to notice the effects of it. And I think 26 is me noticing the effects of poor health on myself. And in my vlogs, sometimes I talk about my back pains and how my body hurts and how it's so important for me to focus on my physical health now, because that's the one thing that you can't reverse. Another lesson that I've learned at 26, or maybe synthesized, because I've been constantly learning in my 20s, but it hasn't been until recently that I've actually put them into words, like the lessons that I learned from my experiences. But I think a lesson that I have for myself is it's easier to maintain something than to fix it. Things like postural habits and fitness and other things like that, it's much better to maintain it and spend the effort putting in the pre-work to keep things in check than to fix it after the fact. So just a reminder that you guys should all keep your health in check and be mindful of it at all times. I think that's the one thing I regret, sacrificing my body for work and for social stuff and for everything else. 26 was a turning point for me to look at my life more thoroughly and think about the things that I was proud of, the things that matter to me, and the things that I wanted to change. I think I've always been a very reflective person. Like, I overthink a lot of things, but 26 is when I started reflecting and then mapping it out for myself, like what exactly all this means. And that's also the birthing place of my podcast. So 26 was when I started thinking about my podcast and wanting to create one. And one of the most amazing things that came out of this year was my podcast. But a lot of deeper thoughts came into my head. And I think that's the birthing place of all the things that I ramble about online now. The sad thing that I will say about 26 though is because things were settling in and I was navigating a lot of my personal health journey, including mental health and burnout journey, I think the year landed a little bit lower in rating for me. So I would maybe rate it a 4 out of 10. I also took a mental health break from work for a period of time, and that let me recenter myself and also think about what mattered to me. And then I started pottery, which is one of the highlights of 26, is diving back into a creative hobby, which I hadn't had for many, many years. And then that brings us to 27, which is the year I'm currently living in. And I was debating whether or not I wanted to say something about this or let myself reach the end of 27 before I talked about age 27. But I think this year is really defined by the home for me. First of all, because we moved to a new place and the whole home process has taken way longer than I expected. I had gone through a really bad relocation depression period for moving, which I've never experienced. Like, relocation depression is so new to me. So that was the first time I experienced it. But we kind of moved very fast after finding this place. And there's a lot of things that I regret about it, whether it's the move or just how we did it. But a few lessons that I took from that. I won't bore you guys with a full story of what happened with our apartment, but something that I learned in the process is that I shouldn't rush things. There's something that James says, which is, you can't have your cake and also eat it. I think that's what he says. But the basic saying is, you can't have everything at once. You know, things take steps and they take phases. And I think with the apartment, we moved so fast and we rushed everything. And the apartment was definitely not in a good move-in state when we came in. There were a lot of unexpected problems. I had concerns about our health living in the new space because of VOCs and various things like that. But that also taught me that I can't always have control over a situation. And the times I'm most stressed in life are when I don't have control. And this really, really taught me to let go of that control, because there's just certain things in life that you can't have a full handle on, and that's okay. The book I'm reading right now, called Flow, mentions that there's so many forces outside of you, like external forces. And if you spend all your time thinking about those external things that you can't change and you can't control, and you spend all your time lamenting it, then you don't actually get the time and space for yourself to think about what you can control and what you can change. And so that's something that I'm carrying into this next chapter of my life, is trying to focus on the things that I can control and doing that as well as I can. This episode's getting a little long, but I also think at 27, one of the things I'm growing into is some of the stuff that my friends who are a little bit older have told me. So when I was 25, I think I made some friends who were closer to 30 or in their 30s. And I remember everyone would tell me the same thing, which is, once you hit your 30s, you're much more confident. You don't worry about things as much. You crave like a slower state of living. And I'm starting to feel that. I'm starting to appreciate slow living a little bit. I'm starting to focus more of my energy on homebody life. I don't go out as much. I don't drink as much, but I'm trying to be happier, and happiness is at the top of my priority list right now. Weirdly, I also feel like 27 has come with way more clarity and no clarity at all. So I feel more assured in the things that I want in life. And I don't think I've gotten there yet. So that's where the lack of clarity comes, that the journey forward is still a journey. It's still something that I don't know how it's going to play out. But there's just a lot more stability, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm kind of burnt out from the many years of all the ups and downs, but I'm so grateful for everything I've experienced. Anytime I feel sad about things, I try to remember that I've been learning throughout every experience I've had. And so running through all these experiences that I've had in the last 7 years is kind of insane to be saying out loud. Like, maybe I'm getting a little sentimental, so please excuse me, but this is a really great exercise if any of you are trying to feel more motivated, to sit down and write down all your accomplishments or things you're proud of or things that you experienced in the last 5 years, because it really makes you think. But I think one of the main key things that I'm trying to carry through the rest of my 27th year is to have more faith in myself. I'm kind of a spiritual person, so lately I've been getting TikToks where it's this guy named Golden Alchemist on TikTok. I actually really like his readings. I usually don't like most horoscopes or tarot card readings, but his I always sit for because I'm like, this is so topical and so relevant to what I'm going through right now. But I saw one this morning and he was talking about, for the Gemini girlies out there, how Geminis have been toggling between a lot of self-faith and self-belief and also fear. And so they're very contradictory feelings, that you feel so confident in yourself and you have so much conviction on your path and what you're doing right now. And then suddenly you'll also be in fear and having scarcity mindset and being super cautious and worrying about things too much. And he was saying that you should really focus your energy on cultivating that self-belief because there's a bright journey ahead. And I'm kind of like butchering what he's saying, but basically there's a lot of good to look forward to and a lot of great things to be focusing your attention towards. And you should stop looking in fear of everything. So that's one thing that I'm trying to carry with me. I'm not going to lie, this morning I was having a little bit of a crisis. I was in a pretty bad mood this morning, and just hearing someone else tell me to focus on the positives is really good. And hopefully that's what I can do for you guys. I know me sitting here and talking isn't a cure all for all your problems, but hopefully it's reassuring to hear some lessons that I've made in my 20s and for me to share my 20s, and hopefully there's some things to learn there. But so far, 27 has been a 6 out of 10 for me. I know there's really amazing things to come and I still have a couple of months. So I'm just going to leave it on the neutral front. But I think that ends our review of my 20s. If you guys have made it this far, please let me know what your favorite year has been in your whole life. It doesn't have to be your 20s. What your favorite year of life has been and why. Because if there's a fun story there, I would love to hear it. And other than that, thank you guys for tuning in today. I'm so grateful for you guys, and I hope you guys will stick on for the rest of season 1. We have some good episodes coming, and I hope you guys all have an amazing Soju Friday. See you next time.